in winemaking, I think our biggest goal is, at least mine as a winemaker, and I hope other winemakers would agree, is that we sit with this amazing thing, terroir, and the biggest goal of a winemaker is to be able to reflect where the grapes come from and to do it in an honest way. And I believe that this way of farming truly does that to the utmost extent. And then, of course, the way you make the wine has also got a role to play. But at the end of the day, everything starts and ends with the grapes you use.
Hi, Barbara. It's so lovely to meet you here on Zoom.
Same to you, Petra. It's lovely. It's lovely to meet you.
Have you finished now with the harvesting?
Yes, we're done. We finished quite early, which I think was a big blessing. Because I know a lot of people struggled with we had a large amount of rainfall now towards the end of the season.
Okay.
Which I know delayed the finish for a few producers, but luckily we managed to get everything in before the rain, which is great. Yeah.
So you are the winemaker at Reyneke Wines.
Yes, I am.
And you are the wines I read is biodynamic and organic.
Yes, they are.
Explain that to me. Organic, I know a little bit, but biodynamic, what does that mean?
Biodynamic. Yeah, so just to kind of let's see if I can put it in a nutshell. It's
Okay.
So with organics, the idea usually is that you try and stay away from chemicals as much as possible. So, for instance, instead of using herbicides, you have to kind of use manual mechanics to remove weeds. In terms of, so you can't spray pesticides, fungicides, you're quite limited in terms of what you're allowed to use. And then in terms of vineyard nutrition, you can only use organic fertilizers. So that is chicken manure and things like this. So organics, kind of the idea is it's a bit more of a sustainable way of farming. With biodynamics, we kind of take that to the next level. So if you think about biodynamics, they're kind of three pillars to it, where the one, and that's kind of probably the most important one to us, is trying to be as self-sufficient as possible. So trying to do everything on the farm. So what I would do, for instance, is we've got this beautiful herd of cattle on the farm, and during harvest time, my skins and pips and stems, which kind of usually is a bit of a problem because it's a byproduct that kind of is left behind, and you've got to make a plan with it. This I get to feed to these beautiful herd of cows.
Wow.
They each evening they are in a kraal, so they kind of come back to a barn setting, and there I can feed them these grapes and stems, and then we can harvest the manure and the urine from them to create these compost heaps, and that we can then in turn feed back into the vines.
Well,
so
I first of all want to ask you, how did you discover that they would eat it? Because you wouldn't think. I mean, I would just assume they eat grass.
No, so they're actually quite cool in the they love it. It's
Really?
a bit of a problem in the evenings if we harvest a bit late and they're already back kind of in the kraal. We actually have to fight them off. It's it's a bit of an issue to try and kind of get past them because they get so excited for these grapes.
Amazing.
And it's fantastic. So I get to feed them that. We get to harvest the manure and then create compost heaps, and then these get fed back into the vines. So that's kind of the one idea of biodynamics, that you try and keep this closed system. You kind of see your farm as its own organism, and within that you try and solve a lot of your problems that you could have kind of in terms of farming. The second thing is you try and see things for their inherent value. So all our cows in the farm, they've all got names. And the idea is that instead of just seeing a cow that can give you meat, is you kind of see it for the whole of what it can do. So we know, okay, our cows, one, we can sell them, and we can sell them for meat. The other thing is, as I said, we have this process where we can harvest the manure and we can use that to feed the vineyards. And the other thing which is amazing at is now, once harvest is done, we send them in between the vines, and they help us control the weeds. So they go and they'll graze in between the vines, and then we don't have to do weed management at this time of the year. So you try and see the value in things. We look at weeds, for instance, on the farm. So a lot of people see weeds as problematic, and there are some that are really problematic. I mean, if you look at queerk, if you look at these weeds that are allelopathic, that kind of try and kill off the things that live around them, that is a problem. But then there are certain weeds that actually play an amazing role. Like in South Africa, for instance, we struggle with a disease in vineyards called leaf roll disease. It's a virus. And we know that this virus is spread by a little insect called a mealybug. And usually, kind of, if you're an organic farmer, what you do is you'd spray a very, very poisonous pesticide to try and kill off these mealybugs so they don't spread, and they don't spread this virus through your vineyards. We, as a biodynamic farm, we can't do that. But what we have realized is that the mealybugs, because once we started farming this way, we realized that the virus isn't spreading as much as we thought it would through the vineyards. And then we had a look, and then we realized that these mealybugs preferred to live on the roots of the dandelions compared to living on the vines. Okay. So because we don't kill off the dandelions, they go and live on their preferred host instead of migrating up into the vineyards. So it's kind of this idea of seeing the value of what everything does and plays a role in the farm.
But now I just want to ask you there. Now, say, for instance, a neighboring farm, they don't have the dandelions. Would their bugs then come over to your farm?
Yes, they do. But the nice thing is, because we've got such a diversity. So as I said, even if those bugs come over, they'll rather go sit in our dandelions than in our vineyards.
Okay.
And I think, especially with pest control, one of the biggest ways to fight it is just to introduce biodiversity, because we know in nature nothing grows in a monoculture, but once we start farming, we create this monoculture which is devoid of diversity, and that's when you get these pests that come in and become a real problem, because they can multiply so quickly because there's just one host.
Yeah.
Where if you start bringing in diversity, it starts changing a bit, and you don't sit with these big problems. Our neighbors, they're the biggest problem is more kind of spray drift coming from our conventional. I think that's probably one of our biggest challenges, especially when it comes to our certifications. So we are certified biodynamically, which means we've got an inspector that comes out once a year and checks and just make sure that what we say we are doing, we are actually doing. But with that, they do analysis on our leaves and so forth. And one thing that always comes up year after year is spray drift. Because we have neighbors that farm conventionally, they do spray chemicals, and these tend to kind of drift over to our vineyards. So I'd say from a neighbor's side, that's the only real problem we have. And then, so back to biodynamics. So those are the first two pillars. The third one is so there's a bit of an esoteric side to biodynamics. And this third pillar is that, so we work with certain preparations that are kind of set out by the biodynamic principles. One that's very famous that most people probably know about is preparation 500. Here what we do is we take some cow manure, we put it in a horn, and then in autumn time we bury it. And it stays underground for the whole of winter, and then in summer it gets dug up again. And then we use that manure that's spent time in the horn. We use that in wintertime to spray on our soils. So once it's dug out, you dilute it in water, and the idea is that you kind of dilute it with a vortex. If you talk about biodynamic principles, they believe that you kind of absorb all the energy from the cosmos if you do it like this.
Wow.
But if you think about it in a bit more of a scientific way, I like to rationalize things sometimes. Is you sit with a horn, which is a natural porous material. You put in manure, which is something that's got quite a big bacterial content to it, and you bury it, underground where things are moist and alive, and then you sit with this breakdown of the manure, and you get all these microbes that can move into this horn. There's air circulation that goes through it, and then kind of after winter, if you take that out, that is just a very, very high concentration of microbes. And if you dilute it and you bring in this air, you kind of aerate it, and you get some activity back into it. So we spray that on our soils, and it's a bit of an inoculum, because then you inoculate your soils with these beautiful microbes that'll kind of do all these amazing work for you in terms of upping your humus content and bringing some nutrients back into the soil, and also just with soil texture. So with biodynamics, you work with these preparations. So that's preparation 500. Then there's a silica spray that we spray on our leaves, which is preparation 501, and that you spray. And the idea is that the silica solution that you spray helps your vines absorb sunlight. Because if you think of silica, it's basically sand. So if you spray that, the amount of light reflection and concentration, it's unbelievable. If you see, so our vineyard manager, Sean, for instance, he is amazing. What he does is absolute magic, and he'll show me. We'll go through the vines, and he'll say, "Well, look, this block," because we usually spray it during the growing season. And say, "Here, you can see this block received 501. This one I still haven't," and just the color difference between the leaves. The one with the 501's been sprayed, it's this luminous green, and you can see there's just a liveliness to the vineyard. And then there are preparations that we use within our compost. So within our compost heap, it's a bit like homeopathy. So it's you've got all these different plants that we use. So the one would be dandelion, we use valerian, we use chamomile, oak bark, and all these kind of plants play a specific role within your compost in terms of just generating heat and conserving energy and all these kinds of things. So that's the kind of the bit more of the esoteric side of biodynamics. And then there's also kind of this. Yeah.
I just want to ask you about the horns, because I saw that on Instagram. I saw the picture of the two horns on the soil, and I was wondering about that. But you must have a huge amount that you then put under the soil.
Yes, so it is. It is quite a big amount. At the moment, our farm is too big for the amount that we can do. So there's an amazing property in Wellington. It's called Biodynamic Kloof, and the farm's probably the home of biodynamics in South Africa to an extent.
Really?
And they help us so we can buy in a few of our preparations from them.
Okay.
Which helps us just with the amount, because as you said, it would be a lot of horns.
Yeah. But that's so interesting. I've never seen that and never heard of that, but it makes absolute sense that that you create these microbes that way. Sorry. Continue with your. It was just fascinating for me, these horns that I saw the picture of.
No, it's look, it is a fascinating way of working. It's I think the idea behind it is that you go a bit more to what farming used to be like, kind of before the whole green revolution, to kind of how people would have farmed hundreds of years ago. And there it was to farm with intuition and with feeling. And I think that's kind of what it moves back to. And it's a bit of a nod. Look, I tend to think of myself as a scientific person. I did a science degree, but I still believe there are certain things in life that can't be proven. That there are still mysteries in the world, and I think biodynamics kind of works in this area of mystery, which is also cool. Like some things, for instance, if you talk about winemaking, you can have a winemaker and a winemaker. You can have one winemaker that does exactly the same as the other winemaker, but there's a certain amount of intuition that also plays a role. You can be extremely practical and do everything right, but the person next to you might do the same thing, but there's something unsaid to the way he does it, and you can pick it up in the wine at the end of the day. And I think with farming there's a similar aspect.
And I think also we talk a lot about organic farming, and it we don't have really the understanding of what it is. But if you talk now about this way of biodynamic, it's really a very natural way. It's really a very logical way to do it. Yeah.
It is. Look, it is a labor-intensive way of doing it. But we're also fortunate. I think we've been doing it for such a long time that we've kind of made all the mistakes that can be made. So we've gone kind of full circle. I think when Johan started farming, or when he started, he had this idea that he just wanted to do good. He wanted to kind of change the way things have been done. And he had this first block of vines that he said, well, here he's going to try and farm differently. And if you speak to him, he says everything went wrong. He had every single pest, every single plague, every single thing that could go wrong went wrong. And then he was lucky to come across this lady, and she just said to him, listen, what you are doing is you are farming organically by neglect. You should change it, and you should start farming organically by design. At the end of the day, you still need to be farming. If you just leave nature, nature's going to take over. And I think there's a lot to be said about that. But yeah, as I said, it's come a long way. And we're still changing and we're still evolving, and there's still things that we're learning and so forth along the way. But I think that's the special thing about it. It's nothing's set in stone, and this is the way you do it. You adapt to nature, you adapt to how the climate's changing, and all these things along with it.
But now you're saying something very interesting, because it's always this thing, where do you start? And you said now that he started with one block. But do you think in the industry where everything has been done in a specific way for such a long time, for farmers it's a bit scary to suddenly think, oh, I'm going to take this risk now. I don't know what's going to happen.
Oh, it is very true, and I think that's the biggest hurdle when it comes to people wanting to convert to organic. So we get a lot of people that come to the farm and speak and want to hear about how we do things and are interested. But when it actually comes to pulling that trigger, some people would start a season and they say, okay, well, this season I'm gonna do it like this, and then then it would be a wet spring or a very damp spring, and people get nervous for mildew, and then they say, oh goodness, but I can't afford to lose my crop if I don't do this well. So then it's very easy just to quickly put through a spray and know you can sleep at night. So there is definitely that element to it where people do get nervous, because it goes against the way things have been done and things have been taught to be done. I mean, what I was taught at university and what we do at Reyneke are completely different things. But at some stage, people are going to have to make that mind shift, because we can't continue going on the way we are. I mean, agriculture is one of the biggest causes of global warming, and it's all due to the fact that to how we farm in a conventional sense. So if we can just kind of make that mind shift, and just just do it right, it could make such a big change. I think the big thing also is that people have forgotten how to farm. These days it's become so easy to farm. You've got 10 consultants that you can have on speed dial. They'll tell you exactly how to do things. This is the program you work with for this year. These are the things you have to spray. You do this, you'll have a crop. Where, as I said, if you farm this way, you have to work a lot more intuitively. You kind of have to look at your weather forecasts, because you're not working. You have to continuously work preventatively. If something goes wrong, it's wrong. There's not much you can do about it. So you constantly have to think preventatively and how to avoid anything from going.
So you've actually retrained yourself.
Because not 100%. So I think the principles always stay the same. I think if you understand how a plant works, a plant will always work in the same sense it will work. I think just the execution can change.
But now, when you make the wine now, or first I want to ask, do you think that the wine tastes differently because you're going through a totally different process? These chemicals and things that are sprayed on the grapes, or that's then say absorbed in this plant, do you think that changes also the taste of the wine?
I believe so. I think, look, in winemaking, we speak about this term terroir, which is kind of an amazing ability where wine has the ability to reflect where it's from. So if a vineyard is planted at a certain aspect at a certain altitude, it has the ability, and on a certain soil type, the wine has the ability to reflect that. And when we speak about terroir, traditionally, it's always kind of been the climate, the aspect, the altitude, the soil type. These things influence your terroir. But something that we've realized also has a big effect on that is your soil health and your soil microbiome. And we kind of saw that firsthand when we started converting to biodynamics and the life started coming back to the soil. We had one block of Sauvignon Blanc, which was always very homogeneous, very uniform. We used to harvest the whole block together and it all looked the same. Once the life started coming back to the soil of that block, the block started changing completely. The one side became a lot more vigorous. The other side kind of stayed the same to what it usually was. And then the grapes just started tasting differently from these two portions. And then we started harvesting them separately, and the resultant wine also had a day and night's difference. And there's nothing, we didn't change anything else. The only thing we changed was the way we farm. And so I do believe it definitely has an effect. It has an effect. That's the soil life has got such a big role to play. And if you speak to people, they say you can pick up a liveliness within the wine. Look, in winemaking, I think our biggest goal is, at least mine as a winemaker, and I hope other winemakers would agree, is that we sit with this amazing thing, terroir, and the biggest goal of a winemaker is to be able to reflect where the grapes come from and to do it in an honest way. And I believe that this way of farming truly does that to the utmost extent. And then, of course, the way you make the wine has also got a role to play. But at the end of the day, everything starts and ends with the grapes you receive.
But now, when we're talking about the winemaking now, what is the process for you then? How you make the wine? So, do you use natural fermentation, or do you add?
Yes. No, so I use all natural fermentation. Look, the way I like to think about it is, Johan and Ishan, there's so much effort that they put into farming the grapes. It would almost be like a sin if I had to go into the winery and try and tweak the wine in the way that I would like it to be. So I tend to work quite hands off. just so I know that the resulting wine can be as much of a reflection of the grapes. So I only do spontaneous fermentations. I tend to work a lot with older oak, so as the oak doesn't have too much of a role to play. And if I work with newer oak, it's all very lightly toasted oak, so there's no really oak toastiness to the wine. And then I still work with sulfur, but I tend to work with it very cautiously, and try to work with it in a very responsible manner, as to not to kill the wine with sulfur, but I still want to keep a purity within the wine. Which, if you want to do that, unfortunately, you need sulfur, because it's our only preservative that we can use. And then the rest, as I said, it's all just straightforward. Spontaneous fermentations on the red wines. I also don't want to extract too much, because the way I like to see it is that it's like when you make a cup of tea. If you want to make a good cup of green tea, for example, you can't leave the tea bag in the water for too long, or the tea leaves, because otherwise you just over extract and you just get a bitterness, which is not pleasant. And I kind of view red wine making in the same way. I think you're naturally going to extract everything that you need to extract. As soon as you start overworking the wine, that's when you start extracting the things that you don't necessarily want in the wine. But that's in a nutshell kind of the philosophy when it comes to the winemaking.
Yeah. Do you think people understand this? That we drink wine and taste the wine and drink the wine and social occasions, but we don't really understand this whole process, because you were talking now about just the farming itself. And that's a whole story in itself. And then part of the winemaking come in. So is it not necessary that people start understanding also that the consumer also demand more in this way of farming, say, and the way of winemaking, than just buying wine for the sake of buying?
I think it's tricky. The people that understand it are always going to understand it, but you've still got to serve the entire market. Now, I'll be honest, even myself on occasion, I'd find myself opening and drinking a bottle of wine or a glass of wine, and then in a social setting you sit and sometimes you don't really concentrate on what you're drinking on. And that's also fine. It's I think wine is there to be enjoyed. It's there to give pleasure, and you can enjoy it in whatever way you see fit, or you would like to. I think it's an added bonus if you truly appreciate it. It's and there is a space for that, but it's the same as if you're an artist with a work of art. Not everybody's going to look at that work of art with the same lenses on.
Yeah.
If it's an abstract piece of art, you're going to have some people that are going to walk by and say, well, you know what, I could have done that.
Yeah.
Where they don't understand the thinking process behind it. And it's always going to be that way, but it's not for me to crucify someone who drinks a glass of my wine and just kind of drinks it for the effect of it. Yeah. That's also fine. It's part of the industry, and it's part of life. It's one of those things.
And it's true what you're saying, that not everybody has the same type of interest also in wine. For some, it's just just a social drink about that. Yeah. But do you get people who are interested in your way of farming, that they specifically buy the wines because of the way you farm?
Oh, definitely. So I think we definitely have a bigger market overseas, because I think people understand biodynamics a bit more, and I think in South Africa it's still a bit of a new concept. But I mean, we've been lucky to receive some nice traction. around our wines, and we've managed to get people write about it and people be very enthusiastic about it, which definitely helps. But it's I think the majority of our consumer base would be someone who understands and drinks it for the quality of it and for kind of the principles behind it.
Now, I want to ask you about you as a winemaker as well. What made you interested in becoming a winemaker?
Oh, for me, it's interesting. So I grew up in a family where wine was always quite prominent. My grandfather used to work in the wine industry, and he acquired a wine farm just outside of Stellenbosch. So we kind of, I grew up partly on that farm, and wine was just kind of always around, but it was never really something I thought about too long or too hard. It was kind of something that was always there. And then when it came to time for me to study, I wanted to study art.
Really?
I was like, I'm going to be an artist one day. This is what I'm going to do. And my father had one look at this pad and he said, I'm sorry, it's not going to work. You want to study art, I'm not going to pay for it. So I said, okay. Then I had to make a different plan. And another interest of me at the time is I love cooking. So I love I love creating things. I love working with my hands. But I also like kind of the flavors of things and working with that. And then my aunt said one day, Barbara, why didn't you consider studying wine? At that stage, I never really thought about it. And when she said it, it was like a light bulb moment. It was like,
really?
why haven't I thought about this? So that's an amazing idea. So so that's kind of how I ended up studying it. And yeah,
but
just a bit.
It's a lot of science as well. But you were saying that you had an interest in art, so you are actually also now using those skills or those talents that you have, because you talked about having the intuition of how to make it, and of course the taste and so many things, awarenesses that you have.
Oh, well, I'd hope so. It's difficult for me to say because I sit from behind the chair. So I'd hope someone would one day taste the wine and say that she's got intuition when it comes to making wine.
Okay.
But I do to an extent. I think people always say that winemaking is this amazing fusion between art and science, and it is to a degree, but I'd say from a daily basis, I probably rely more on my science background than I do on my art background. I think the art background, I think if you think creatively, it teaches you a different way of thinking, and I think that that definitely helps me from a day-to-day basis. I think everybody needs to have some experience in creative thought, because it's an amazing way of problem solving and just trying to think of a different way to do things. So for that part, I'm quite grateful for it. I do miss it every now and then.
Really? But do you paint, or do you what do you do as a hobby, or then?
Not really. I wish I still had the time. I dabble a bit in photography every now and then, but something that I tend to forget. And then I realize, oh goodness, I haven't really done anything creative in a while. And then I'll find something. So I'd go for a printmaking lesson, or I'd try and paint something. But I wouldn't say I'm necessarily very good. So it's probably a better thing I went to do art.
No, but it's so interesting because I spoke to a viticulturist and she paints as well. She does art as well. And yeah, I find it so interesting how you're talking about science now, but I think there's such a great connection between science and art, and between maths and art. And it's a pity that we don't have that that art is such or would I say, on the same level, seen on the same level as all those subjects like science and maths.
Oh, that's definitely true, because there's a great link between it. I mean, if you have a look at a musician, for instance, there's always a big link. If you're a great musician, usually you have a tendency to be really good at maths at the same time, because it's the same kind of thought process. And then so there's definitely this great link. I think it also depends. Sometimes I think science can tend to be very much black and white, where it's like this or it's not like this. If you go into like true science and into kind of the literature behind science and how things are done, so in that sense probably not, but there's still kind of to think of as a scientific study, or to kind of think about what path you're going to take in science, that I believe there's an element of creativity to that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So there is a link, and I do believe people should keep that link, because as soon as that link's lost, life just becomes too black and white.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. So now, about your wines, what types of wines do you make at Reyneke?
We've got an array. We make two types of Sauvignon Blancs. One that's kind of a blend of all the vineyards on the farm. So we're quite lucky. We're situated on the Polka Hills, which is a ward just outside of Stellenbosch. It's this beautiful little hill. It's all granitic soils, and we're quite close to False Bay. So if you stand on top of the hill, you can kind of see the entire False Bay from Hunklip to Cape Point. And then if you look on the other side, you see the entire Stellenbosch and all the surrounding mountains. So it really is a pretty farm. But with that, it has this amazing ability to create these great grapes when it comes to winemaking. So we've got Sauvignon Blanc, which is nice because we've got this proximity to the ocean. There's a cooling effect, which really helps in terms of Sauvignon Blanc. Then we've got two beautiful, beautiful old vineyards of Chenin Blanc, the one planted in 1974 and the other one in 1976. So make a lovely Chenin out of that. And then on the red side, we've got Syrah. And Syrah does really well on the Polka Hills. I think the Polka Hills is getting a lot more traction when it comes to the Syrah that's produced from there. And then we've got Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc. So it's in South African terms, it's not a big variety, but it's big enough for us, and we're very happy with the quality we get from it.
Are you also part of the Old Vine project with the older vines that you have?
Yes, we are. So our Chenin is part of the Old Vine project, which is really amazing and exciting for us. And it's a great project to be part of, and an amazing initiative.
I'm fascinated by that project. I absolutely love the idea. I think there's so much about that, that's so great, and that it's something that I also am very interested about. That it's done, and also how it's done in South Africa. So.
And it's great because we really should preserve our heritage. We've got such a rich heritage when it comes to vineyards and winemaking in South Africa. Because we're kind of people talk about old world and new world, and South Africa is still seen as old world. But kind of when we started planting grapes here, it's a lot earlier than any of the other new world countries. So we're kind of stuck in the middle. And we've got this really rich heritage that comes behind that, and this project is just such a great initiative in kind of trying to preserve that heritage that we have.
Well, Barbara, it was so lovely to talk to you, and so interesting. I love this way of farming. I would love to come and visit you one day to see how you do it, because it's absolutely amazing.
Gosh, no, please, you're more than welcome. You can come to the farm anytime. We can show you. I can show you around and show you all the new projects that we've got going. It's especially now. It's a very exciting time on the farm.
Really, yeah. No, I find this. I find this biodynamic way of farming really very interesting. But just one last question: what are the wishes for you now for the future?
Oh goodness. Well, on the farm side, we've got very exciting things coming in the future. We've recently purchased the neighboring property, and we're at the moment planting 40 hectares of vines. But very, very exciting, kind of trying to plant vines that we know will one day hopefully be old vines, and planting it in a bit of a new way in terms of keeping in mind kind of how our climate's going to change going forward. So we planted it at a bit of an altitude. The slopes are a bit steeper than what we usually plant vines on in South Africa. But with that, we've had a few things to mitigate the steepness of the slopes. We've pulled contours within the hillside in order to be able to harvest the water that falls, because we know that our rainfall is going to become less and less and less. And then when it actually does going to rain, it's going to be a lot of rain at once. So we've also shortened the rows of our vineyards in order to mitigate the erosion, to know that if that big amount of rainfall comes, that we don't sit with soil washing away. We've got a big biodiversity project happening where we are, so we've got an amazing indigenous endangered renosterveld on the farm. So we're harvesting fynbos out of that renosterveld in order to put in corridors in between our vineyards, to increase biodiversity. So from a farming perspective, that's some very exciting things that are happening in the future. For me personally, I think there's hopefully just to grow with Reyneke and to grow with the brand, and to be able to make some exceptional wines.
Amazing. Well, this is amazing project that's coming up. I hope you post on Instagram, because I'm following you and watching what you're doing. So that would be amazing to see.
Sure thing. No, I'll make sure to put some posts up.
Okay. Okay, Barbara, have a lovely day in the beautiful Stellenbosch.
Oh, thank you. And same to you. And thank you. This was lovely. I hope I talked some sense.
Yeah, you did. Absolutely. Okay, Barbara.
Okay, have a nice day. Enjoy Easter weekend.
Thank you. You too. Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Cheers.